And now we're going to go ahead and launch the Designer Launcher. The Designer Launcher, very similar to Perspective Workstation Launcher. And so in my case here, I've got a bunch of gateways that I connect to often, but my local host right here is one of my favorites. So I'll go ahead and open that Designer. So if I come in to my Workstation demo project in the Designer, as this comes up here, actually it's probably worth me noting for those of you who aren't familiar with Ignition, this is our design environment, comes with the software. You don't pay for it separately. It's a multi-developer environment, meaning that you can do concurrent development. You can have multiple developers all logging in, working on the same project at the same time. And it's where you do all your configuration, from configuring your tags, your alarms, your screens, all that kind of stuff. So your reports, yeah, unified development environment. And as you add more modules to Ignition, it just unlocks more functionality inside this design environment. But it is launched now. And so an orientation real quick to this, we have different workspaces that you can go into. So right now we're in the perspective workspace, but if I switch this to like vision, then you'll see it changes what kind of options I have, what I can build, that kind of stuff. But today we're focused on perspective. Here we go, perspective. So from here, we start off on the main config page. We often refer to this just as page configuration for perspective. And from here, there's a couple things I want to highlight. The first off is inside our project browser, we have things called views, and those are the actual screens you develop. But from the Perspective Workstation Launcher, you don't reference individual views. Instead, you reference pages. And so my home page, which has just been that slash, I have mapped through this page configuration to be a URL that's just a slash, but my primary view being page/home. And it also allowed me to define a header and a side menu right here on the page configuration. And I also have other page configurations to go to an alarm screen, a chart screen, and to my office page. So, that's where you're going to grab the URLs that you're going to use inside the Workstation Launcher. So you can see here, if I go to page configuration, I have a slash. That slash is referencing this slash on my page config, and then this /office is what is being referenced by /office here for display 2. The next piece of this is the actual screen that I built. So if I come to my home screen here, what I wanted to do is I wanted to have the ability to have a map, and I wanted to be able to click on different elements and have them, give me some information about those sites. And mine's really simple, just shows me how many years we were there. But for you, it may be, any alarms at that site or any, data or whatever. In my case, this is just a perspective map component. And on the perspective map component, under UI, we have markers. And for those markers, I've given it a latitude and longitude and so on. But with these, I wanted it so that it would change something on a different monitor, a different display. But what if I am running directly in a browser? Because of that, I have a script that I'm saying, all right, if I'm running in workstation mode, then I want to do something to write to another screen. Else, I know I'm in a browser or on mobile or something, and in that case, I just want to open a pop-up on this current screen. So to show you that in action, if I come back to my browser here, and I go ahead and launch Workstation Demo, same thing, prompts me to log in. But now, since I'm not in workstation mode, not using the Workstation Launcher, this project is just going to launch on a single screen. And because I have my if statement in there, if I click on these, I instead get a pop-up on the screen that shows me the details about that site. And so you're going to find yourself when you're trying to create things that need to be both used in Workstation on multi-monitor displays, but also used in a browser or on a mobile device, then you're going to have these, if statements throughout your project. It may be that the projects you're using for, Workstation are their own projects anyway. And so you absolutely can develop just completely separate projects for what would run in a browser, what would run on a desktop. But if you want one project to do both, you certainly can. And the real key to making that happen is that if I come back into the designer and I go to my page config again, we have these session properties over on the side. And these are all different kinds of information that I can see about Perspective when it's launched. And these are visible in the designer, but these are also accessible via bindings and scripting from inside, your normal screens that you build. And so if I come down to device, I can see a type property here. And right now mine is set to designer because the device that I'm running this on is a designer that I'm running it in. But in this dropdown, you can see that type of device, I could also have this set to iOS or Android if I was running in our mobile app. I could have it in browser if I'm running in a browser. And last but not least, we have Workstation. And so if you're trying to figure out if your client is running in a browser or Workstation or a mobile app, you're just gonna need to reference this property. And so that's what I'm doing on my homepage here. If I go back to that script, configure events, on marker click, meaning they clicked on one of my markers on my map, it's gonna check my session property, that's device type, and I'm gonna say if it's Workstation, then I wanna do something to have it happen on a different screen. Otherwise, I'm just opening a pop-up on my current screen. So hopefully that makes sense. But now let's talk about how I'm actually reaching out to a different screen. Well, that's not something that's unique to Workstation because you could have had multiple tabs open before, things like that. So we already have some features built in that help you figure out having something affect in a different location than where you're clicking the button or doing the action. And so what I'm using here is called a message handler. And a message handler is a script, a listener that you can put anywhere inside your project. And then from somewhere else, you can use a send message script to call out to that message handler and pass it some kind of payload. And I won't get too technical going deep into this. We have a lot of documentation that walks through message handlers on our user manual, so you can go check that out. But essentially what I'm doing is I see that when I've clicked on a marker, it gets me the name from the event. So it's getting me the name of the marker that I clicked on. In my case, that's gonna be my office name. So I'm taking office, giving it event name, passing it as my payload to whoever's listening in this handler called switch office. So now to show you where that listener is that I'm passing this payload of which office I'm looking at. So if I come to my office view here, then right now it's just blank because I don't have anything selected. I don't have an office chosen. It's getting passed in as this parameter here. I have an office thing. And so if I came in here and typed new office, for example, then, oh, well, I have to, case matters here because I have some bindings. But so I typed in new office. It now shows that here. If I get rid of that parameter, then once again, it'll be blank. But what I wanted to show is on the root container, if I go to configure scripts, then I have this message handler here under scripts called switch office. And this is what I was calling from my script event on my markers on my map. And so all that this script is doing is, first of all, it's listening. And I could have it just listening for anything that came from the same view or from the same page. But in my case, it's coming from somewhere else in the session, a different monitor. And so I'm listening at the session scope. And all I'm doing is I'm taking what comes out of the payload. I'm taking that office parameter that comes in, and I'm assigning it to my local parameter on my view, office. So a really simple script. And so you could have a message handler anywhere in your project you want, listening on a session scope, and then anytime you have a button or an action or something that's supposed to do something on a different screen, you just call that message handler. And I don't need to know which screen it's on. I don't need to know anything like that. I just need to know the name of the message handler, the message type it is. So yeah, pretty simple. And that is going to allow me to, dynamically from home, check to see if I'm in workstation mode. If I'm in workstation mode, I'm gonna call out to that message handler and I'm gonna pass it some parameter. And so that's cool, but how I have this set up right now is that Office doesn't have a default. So nothing shows up there. Maybe I do wanna have a default from a specific workstation. So I wanna pass in a parameter when I assign my page. So if I come back to Workstation here, I'm in Manage, you say, all right, in my page config here, I want to open Office on my second display, but I also want to pass in a parameter that specifically I want it to default to New Office. How do I do that? Well, once again, you don't need something special in Workstation to do that. Those kind of features already exist in Ignition. So what I'm going to do here is come back to my designer, go back to my page config, but this time, rather than just having a page URL that's /office directing to my office view, I'm actually going to create a new one here, and I still want it to be /office, and I still want it to point to my office view, but I'm going to add a /:office here. Maybe you didn't know that this existed, but within your page URLs, if you do a colon and then a name of something, it'll take whatever goes into that URL and it will pass it as a parameter for whatever parameter matches this name. So in my case, I had that parameter called office. And so if I do this, anything in that URL that comes after office / will be passed to that office parameter. So I'll go ahead and save this now. All right, that's saved. And now I'm gonna go back into my Perspective Workstation, go to Manage, go to Page Config. So now instead of just going to /office, I'm gonna go to /new office. And so it's gonna take whatever comes after office / and this new office is gonna be passed as a parameter to that view. So I'll go ahead and say, okay. It's gonna be hard to demo this because I can't really show you my different screens. But if I was to launch this now on my secondary display, it will default to new office. I'll see if I can drag that over. But yeah, so it's really easy to then pass parameters, and you can do like /:office /:something else /:something else to pass as many parameters as you want as part of the URL into Perspective. Yeah, that's how you pass parameters. So that comes up. This is my primary screen. On my secondary screen, it's not letting me pull that over. So you'll have to take my word for it that the secondary display just comes up now, and that I'm able to pass that parameter and I can see it showing orange there. So yep, that's passing parameters. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is, well, actually, I shouldn't have closed that. Make sure that's all good. Yep. If I go ahead and launch this now, we'll show you in the designer while it's launching. On my home screen here, I have this other view that I've embedded called title. And on my title, I've added 3 buttons. And these 3 buttons are windowed, kiosk, and exit, because we give you the ability inside the client to toggle between windowed kiosk or to exit Workstation altogether. So if you're in a kiosk mode, you could still add buttons that change things, not relying on the window to be able to tell you that. So if I come into windowed here, configure event, whoops, not configure events. I just wanted to show you configure, here we go. Now that I'm on the actual button, you can add actions. Before I was showing a script action, but we have lots of other actions for things you can do on a button click or any kind of action. Open in a pop-up doing navigation. But now we have this new set of actions called Workstation mode. And if I go to Workstation mode, I just want to keep the one I have. I can say I want to switch to windowed mode, switch to kiosk mode, or toggle between the two. And so in my case, this is my windowed button, so I have it set to switch to windowed mode. And then similarly on kiosk, I have it set to switch to kiosk. And then lastly, I have this exit one. And what I'm doing on this button is, if you're familiar with scripting and Ignition, you can do all these scripting functions under system. So I do system dot, and if you do control spacebar, it brings up our autocomplete. I can go through here and I can choose any of our built-in scripting functions. I'm going to go into Perspective. It's worth noting, I think this is the first time we've done this. Before, it's always been 3 tiers. So there's system, and then area, like perspective, and then the actual function. Because Workstation only applies to perspective, but kind of is its own set of things, we now have a 4th tier. So I come down to Workstation, and then I have some functions underneath that. And so I have 2 kiosk and 2 windowed, which do the same things as those actions do. So I could just do it via scripting as well, but this last one is exit, which is what I did right above it. And what exit does is it just closes Workstation mode. So to show that in action, I've opened Workstation, and right now I'm in windowed mode. But if I come in now, and as this loads here, you'll see my header. If I switch to kiosk mode, then you can see it went full screen for me. I can no longer see everything else going on. I could switch back to windowed mode. Now it's in a window again, or I could go ahead and click exit. And if I click exit, it just closed Workstation for me. So yeah, we have some new actions. We have some scripting functions that you can play around with. And so in the future, we'll probably have additional Workstation specific actions or scripts that may come into play.